it! This is Shazza the Shark. Shazza could do the editing, I suppose. Might be a bit above your pay grade, Shazza. You can just sit up there. All right, enough stupidity, we got shit to do. So today we're gonna cover an editing workflow just in Lightroom. I've got one, two, three, I don't know. So I've got 3 example images that we're gonna work through today. There's a hell of a lot to cover, so we might as well get stuck into it. So we'll start with this one, which is a nice little tiger shark image. I feel it's a pretty good example of the sort of images I see a lot of people post on social media. Conditions weren't great on the day, the visual was a bit average, and ideally it should have been shot a little bit closer to the subject. There's been a bit of surface ripple on the day, so if we zoom in and have a look, you can see the silhouette is a little bit rough, but there's no major perspective distortion going on, so at least it still actually looks like a shark. So this here is the original image that we're looking at. This is how I've cropped it. Now, the final image that I produced for this one is this right here. So how did we achieve that? We start out with our cropped image. I'll drop the highlights all the way down. I'll bring the shadows all the way up. Now, the one thing I won't do though, when I do landscapes, I'll hold shift and double click on the wording for white and black here, and it will automatically max out those sliders for you. And it works really well with landscape stuff, but it really does not do a good job with these sorts of images. So if I do this, it goes really aggressive with the white, but it gets even worse with the black. As you can see, that looks absolutely disgusting. That is not what we want. So I will just eyeball these ones. The white, I'll just take it to what I think sort of looks somewhere about right, maybe about there. And the blacks, same thing with blacks. All I'm trying to do by tweaking the white and the black point of the image is you're trying to drag more contrast out of it. Like, we're starting with a raw file, it's a very flat image. We need to get more contrast out of that image. So that is all we're trying to achieve here. I think that looks pretty good about there. Next thing I'll do is I'll go down to the tone curve panel. I usually just use the sliders here in the first panel. It does a pretty good job. You can just grab the slider and yank it around and it'll give you an idea of which part of the image it's gonna have an effect on. Once again, we're just making an S-curve really to try and drag some more contrast out of this image. So we can go before and after, from that to that. So just with a few simple slider adjustments, we've already got a much more pleasing image to look at. So from there, tone curve adjustments, we'll go into the HSL panel. It's the HSL panel and also the calibration panel that you'll find yourself spending a large amount of time in when you're doing these kind of edits, because obviously a big part of these images is how you decide to manipulate the color of the water. Everyone's gonna have their own tastes on where they want that color palette. So I don't go into these with any preconceived ideas. I just start shifting sliders around and see what happens. It's a perfect example of that saying, the more you fuck about, the more you find out. You go in and you just fuck about and you play with the sliders in HSL. You're not sure which tones are the ones you need to be targeting to have the effect you want. I find it quite easy if you just go down to luminance. If you grab your luminance ones and screw around with them, you'll very quickly get an idea of which particular color is going to have the biggest impact and where in the image it's going to have an impact. So you can see there, it's the aqua that is going to have a very big effect if I start to shift that around. And I do want the water to have more of that bluey aqua sort of look. So yeah, maybe around there. It's a decent starting point. You will find yourself going back and forward between like calibration and even white balance and the HSL panels. You tweak a bit here, you go to one, you tweak it again, changes the colors a little bit, and then maybe you want to go back to the HSL and we'll, drag some aqua out of it or bring the luminance up in the blue or, silly things like that. You definitely don't just get away with, smash some numbers into these, onto the next one and you're done. A big part of the amount of time it takes to do these edits is going back and forward between these panels to get your colors right. What I don't like, you can see the sun cut these caustic rays of bright light through it. There's a lot of tint from the sunlight there. Those are going to be yellow and orange, I'm guessing. Yep. So what I'll do is I'll just drag the saturation of both of those all the way out of it just to clean up those, because you can see that those colors are having no effect on the watercolor itself. It's just those light rays. So we can drag the saturation all the way out of them to clean that up. I also don't like the shadows are tinted quite heavily with the blue on this. As you can see, if you raise the luminance of the blue, you can see it's literally just affecting the shadow side. So I might drag some of the saturation out of the blue as well. It looks a little bit better. And then what we can do though, even though we've dragged the color all the way out, we can still play with the luminance slider to brighten up those caustic rays a bit and try to bring attention to them a little bit. And then we'll play around also with the luminance of the colors just to see if I can actually double click the right one, because the water is a little bit dark. So we can go up with that. If I want to add some darkness into the shadows in just the shark, I can actually just reduce the luminance of the blue a little bit. I think that's pretty good there. So we can go before and after. See, once again, just a few slider changes and we've made a pretty drastic alteration to this image. Something I'll point out quickly just before we go to the next panel though is you'll notice if I turn HSL off, you can see there is a little bit of image noise here. This one was shot at ISO 200. You will find that as you start to push and pull the colors around with these sorts of edits, you really drag all that image noise out of it. And it's why I made a big emphasis in the first video explaining how I shoot these. I'll always try to keep the ISO as low as I possibly can, because even at ISO 400, you start to get to the point where it's hard to clean up that image noise just in Lightroom. I actually normally use the Topaz Labs denoise software, which is an absolute lifesaver at times. This one being at ISO 200, I'd get away with just leaving it in Lightroom. But moving on. So we finished with the HSL. The next one I'll go to is the calibration panel. I normally don't end up pushing these ones that aggressively. It's very rare that you have to push these ones very aggressively to get the result that you want. But it's once again, it's just a case of fuck around and find out. So you boost the sliders around, see what they're going to do to the image, and then make your decision on which direction to take it from there and just bump it up bit by bit. Yeah, what happens with the saturation? I like what that's doing as we bump up the saturation of the red too. So we'll bump that up a little bit. What does the green hue do? Oh, that's nice. See, that's starting to look pretty. I do like that. Yeah, about 30 maybe. What does the blue do? Bump the blue up, but it starts to go a bit greener again. We take it out of it. No, I don't really like that. I don't like what the blue's doing. The blue can stay put how it is. I think we'll go with that. But you'll notice, as I was saying, you can see it drags a little bit more image noise out of it. So we'll finish with that. We'll go up to the sharpening for the masking side of it. If you hold Alt or you drag your slider, you'll get this overlay. Basically wherever the white is, sharpening is getting applied. Wherever it's not white is where the noise reduction is going to get applied. So we'll go pretty high with this because we only want the silhouette of the shark and its markings and stuff getting sharpened. And then as for luminance, there is a bit of noise there. So if we go up to like 20, 25-ish, somewhere around there. So before, after, it's done a pretty good job of tidying up all that image noise. There is a little bit there still. You could go further with the luminance and remove more of that noise, but you start to lose some of the detail in the shark. So I don't like to push it too hard. Pretty much where I ended up with this one for those first few panels. From here, the next thing would be to do some spot removal because we have got a few little bits of stuff floating around on the surface of the water and a few other little bits and pieces that they're just a distraction. Once again, we just want to keep people's attention on the shark and not have the eye getting caught by little bits of crap in the frame and dragging the eye's attention away. Oh, what was that? And you stop looking at the subject. You want to keep the viewer's attention on the subject. So we're going to tidy up all that crap in the water. Standard settings I find are pretty much spot on for all this sort of stuff. So we'll just go through and remove all the little bits and pieces. I'll speed up this process and we'll see what it looks like on the other side of it. And just like that, we're done. So if we go before and after, and it just gets rid of those annoying little distractions and we'll keep the attention on the shark. Thankfully, this one didn't have a great deal of spot healing that needed to be done. The final thing left to do is just to use some masking. And what we're looking to try to do is manipulate the light a little bit and just add some depth to the image and make it a little bit more interesting. Now, something I see on social media a lot, and it drives me absolutely insane, is when they're creating fake light leaks or just using masks to put light through the frame and things like that. They don't pay attention to where the light was naturally coming from in the image in the first place, and they'll make it come from like a completely different direction and it stands out like fuck and it drives me mental. So I will always make sure that my light is coming through the frame from the direction that it was originally coming from. We zoom in on the shark, you can see that the light was coming essentially from the top right. It's lighter on this side of the shark than what it is down on this side of the shark. Like, it's not rocket science. So obviously we're gonna try to make it lighter through this part of the frame and darker down through this part of the frame. And we do that with a couple of simple gradients. So we'll go from the bottom first, we'll grab a linear gradient. Normally just drag it up something like that. Drop the exposure a little bit. I often do this not with the exposure, but I'll use the whites slider and I'll drag the whites down instead. I find it just to be a little bit more of a natural way to darken the image off. Maybe go a little bit with the blacks as well. We don't need to be too aggressive with this. We just want to darken it a little bit. And if you look, see how the water down here through this bit, it's a little bit greenish compared to the rest of the image. I really don't like that. So I might just adjust the tint a little bit, just to get a little bit more blue back in it, just to get rid of that green tint. I'm not really sure why it's there, but that's better like that. Then before and after, then to create the light from the top of it, I actually like to do this with a radial filter. And I'll make a big ass radial filter and feather the absolute fuck out of it. Place that up in the corner like that. And I will raise up the blacks. I'll put some negative dehaze into it. Normally about 25, minus 25 is a good starting point. Still not quite bright enough, so maybe we'll just bump the saturation a little bit, about there maybe. And also, just drag a little bit of saturation out of it. Nothing too aggressive, just a little bit. You'll generally find that the brighter sections of an image where the light source is coming from, you don't have as much color saturation in those brighter areas. So you drag a bit of saturation out of it as well. It just sells the concept a bit better. Might even go a little bit further, something like that. Before and after. I do like the effect. I prefer to do it by raising the blacks and adding some haze effectively into it by negative dehazing it, as opposed to just bumping up the exposure, because I like the way that it creates a sort of a softer exposure look as opposed to just aggressively bumping up the exposure and relying on the feather of the mask to feather it out. I don't believe it does as nice of a job as doing it this way. And this is, whenever I create a light leak or a light source within an image with my landscape stuff, this is quite often how I go about doing it. So if we go before and after, we've made a quite dramatic difference to the image just with 2 masks. That's all we've done. Pretty big difference. So what can we do from here? Well, I'd still like to work on just the shark. We can go select subject and we'll see how good of a job Lightroom's going to do for us. Sometimes Lightroom fails epically with this and it just only selects half of the shark. Other times it does a really good job. Push O for the overlay and it's an absolute miracle. It's done a pretty good job. You can see, if you look really closely, it's not perfect. It's just got these feathery little annoying bits around the edge of it, which I'll let them live for now. Normally, I'd go to the trouble of zooming right in. I'd go to the subtract from mask section there, and I would go around with the brush and clean up all those little fuzzy bits around the object, and just to make sure I've got a nice, clean, sharp mask around the shark. Now, masking options is pretty much the biggest reason why I will take these edits into Photoshop at times. You have a hell of a lot more masking options in Photoshop than you do in Lightroom. The single most important thing to produce a really, really visually stunning image with these sorts of edits is a good, clean mask. These are the reasons why I was hammering home the point in the last video about getting close, waiting for the shark to come right up the surface, and you want good viz and all that stuff, because it makes your life a lot easier in post. But for now, the select subject option has done a good enough job for us to demonstrate what we're going to do here today. So now I've got the shark. See, we've lost some of his shadow detail. So might just bring the shadows down a bit. Yeah, somewhere around there. Might even bring the blacks down. Yeah, there we go. So that's what we're looking for. So I'm pretty happy with that for now. What I will do though is I'd like to work on just the water and not affect the shark. So what we can do is we'll create a new mask. We'll go, where'd it go? There. We'll go select subject again. So it's going to create the exact same mask. But what we can do with this one is we can invert it. So if we invert the mask, we can work on everything except for the shark. So happy days, because we want to, I don't like, you can see down in the bottom here, I think it would have been detail in the sandy bottom underneath the shark. I just don't like how that looks. It's a little bit distracting and a little bit gritty sort of looking, and just, it's not doing it for me. So what we can do, if we're just working on the water, the best way to get rid of that look is if you just drag the texture and the clarity like right out of it, and it'll just smooth things out. Just kind of mushes it all together into a bit of a blur. But I do like what it does to the water in these kind of edits. It does make a big difference. Have you got before and after? So all of a sudden it's not quite as, doesn't stand out quite as much. So it all looks pretty good. There is one more thing that I will add though. We will get a radial gradient. Feather doesn't need to be as extreme though. And what we want to do is just create a little bit of a shadow under the shark. Doesn't need to be huge. Maybe something about there. Sort of roughly the size of his body. You want to line it up with where the light's coming from. The light's coming from up there, so we want the shadow to be on this side of him, down underneath him. Nothing too extreme. Only needs to be a little bit. If you go too far, it becomes super obvious that, you know, that's not the shape of the shark. You just want to add just a little bit. It's just, you're only trying to sell it just a little bit. So we drop it 0.1. So even at 0.2, that it stands out way too much for my liking. So it does make a noticeable difference. It just adds depth to the image. That's all we're trying to do here. We're trying to sell the fake light that we're putting into the image basically. So that is about all I do for the masking. So there's nothing complex going on there, but with just those few masks, we've completely altered the look of this image. Once I've gotten to this point, I will then come back to my basics panel. I'll play around with the highlights and the shadows and sort of bring them back into the image a little bit more, just to see what it's going to do. So tweaking the highlights isn't going to do much. The shadows will. I don't want to make it too dark on that darker edge of the shark though. So from there, the whole thing's a little bit bright still. Might just, maybe there. I think I like that. And that's it. That's the process. I think it's actually a bit lighter than the one that I did the first time around. Actually surprisingly close with these ones looking between the two. But no, I'm pretty happy with that. The fact I've ended up my original edit for this before I made this video being noticeably darker than the one that I've ended up with whilst we're editing it today, it's a very good example of something else with these images, which is when you're tweaking something so aggressively, especially with the colors and the look of an image like this, I find it very beneficial to work on it for a certain amount of time, then walk away from it. Like go and do something else for 15, 20 minutes, half an hour, and then come back and look at it with fresh eyes. And I can guarantee you that most of the time, an image that you were happy with when you walked away from it, you'll come back and there will be something like the colors you'll look at it and go, oh, fuck, that's horrid. I'm going to go and adjust the colors this way or that way or something like that. I mean, I do that with landscape photography anyway, but it's definitely very, very, very beneficial with these kinds of edits. So we'll finish that one and we'll move on to this next image now. I'm not gonna go through the process quite as in-depth as what I did there. What I'll do is I'll just go through each panel and show you what I've done in each panel to end up with the final image that we ended up with from this one. But this is the original image here. Nice little hammerhead doing his thing. This is what I ended up with for this image. Pretty drastic difference, as you can see. From the original image that we've cropped, this is what I have done in the basics panel. The same thing, drag the shadows and the highlights all the way up and down, put the white and black point where I wanted just to get more contrast out of that image. Next, I would have gone to the tone curve panel, I turn that on. Same thing as last time, I'm just tweaking those sliders to create a bit of an S curve to get more contrast out of it. HSL slider, if I turn that on, we've made a quite noticeable difference to the color palette of the image, trying to get away from that green look and get more towards those blue aqua sort of tones, these ones really did start to drag that image noise out. I mean, look at that. There is a massive difference there, and it's starting to get quite ugly. Go down to calibration and I turn this one on. Once again, just tweaking that color palette, getting it where I want it, starting to get a little bit more green out of it, start to get more towards those blues and those aqua tones. I forgot before for the detail panel to clean it up. Zoom right in here. Got before, a hell of a lot of image noise, and after. It's cleaned it up a lot. There's still a bit there. So that's where I was at with all the sliders in the panels. The next thing would have been the spot removal, because we've got a few bits of crap floating on the water. Turn that on. This was another image that only had a little bit of cleaning up that needed to be done, so it was good. Now, the masking makes a very big difference with this one. Turn the masks on, and it's a very drastic image. Very drastic image, very drastic change to the image, fuck me. So I won't go and create them all. We'll go through them one by one. I'll show you what I've done here. First mask has been the object selection. You can see there's a couple of brushes added here, and it would have been because the initial subject selection, see how it's missed parts of the shark? So it's missed some of it there, it's missed some of it there, it's missed some of it there. So first brush, you can see where I've painted in the bits that needed to be painted into the mask. Once again, it's not the neatest job. I would usually take a bit more time, zoom in more and do it a bit neater, but these edits were just to be able to make this video. The last brush, this one here, would have been a subtraction brush, and that would have been to go around and clean up the edges where it was bleeding past the object and into the water, just to try to keep it on the silhouette. And this has been for the sole reason. So there's a lot of color cast in this one because he's been deeper in the water. You can see the tones in the water are actually very similar to all the tones in the shadows on the shark, and that's not what we want. We want to be able to isolate that shark. We want him to be at the front of the image. It's all about him. He's the hero. So just by doing that, and then we look in the panel, all I've done, I've dragged a heap of saturation out of it just to get rid of that color cast. Added a little bit of texture and clarity just to give him a little bit of definition, tidy him up a bit. The next mask I have used, if I press O, it's, once again, I've just done the whole thing of selecting the subject. I've then had to clean that one up, and then you invert that mask. And I've pushed the contrast up and the texture and the clarity. What I'm trying to do, and what I've done this one for, is to really over-exaggerate all of the highlights and the shadows in that water, into all those sand ripples down in the bottom, really trying to sell that look of swimming pool water. Next mask after that, a great big radial gradient. Raise the blacks, I've put some negative dehaze into it, and I have upped the exposure a little bit. But what I have done with this one, unlike the last one, you can see it wasn't effective. If I turn the overlay back on, you can see it's not affecting the shark, because if I turn off the other two bits of brush, see how when it was just the radial gradient, it affects the shark way too much. If I turn that on and off, it just fades out and brightens up, and once again, it starts to make that shark blend into the background. We really don't want that. So what I've done is, from that initial radial gradient, I've gone subtract, and the options that come up, you select the subject option, which I've then done. But once again, because the subject selection for this particular image wasn't doing the greatest job, I've then had to use a brush to clean that mask up, just to finish painting the rest of that mask into the shark. So we had the whole silhouette not getting affected anymore. So the end result is that I get my light leak how I want it, but it doesn't affect the shark. And it just helps to separate the shark from the background. Once again, just trying to sell that concept of depth and definition within the image. Next one has just been a linear gradient from the bottom to darken up the bottom of the image. And I've also dragged down the clarity and the texture a little bit. And then the very last mask in this one is, once again, just creating a fake shadow, trying to sell that illusion of depth. And just like the last one, I've literally just bumped the exposure down by 0.1, because if we go even to 0.2, it becomes super obvious that there is something fake there. It's just too much. It's literally all I've done with that one. And it's another example of a few simple masks, nothing complex, and it completely changes the look of that image. See, before it's like, a few masks, bam, belter. Just like that. Well, not belter, close enough. We'll call it a belter. Fuck it, it's a belter. But that's all I've done with that image there. On to our last image that we're gonna have a look at today, and it is this beautiful tiger shark. This was an absolutely epic day that this photo came from. I was down at the pond with a few of the boys, right place, right time, things line up, and a few of us were lucky enough to get a drone over it, and look at that. absolutely no distortion to the silhouette. You can even see all of his little fishy friends swimming around in front of him. That's the original image there, not cropped. This is the final edit that I produced with this one. So once again, we'll just go through it panel by panel and I'll switch things back on, but that's the original set of basic adjustments there. So that's a before any adjustments. So what we've gotten with just the basics panel, tone curve, again, creating a bit of an S-curve, dragging more contrast out of it. Do you see a pattern here? It's pretty much the same process I'll go through with all of these photos. The only thing that you'll find yourself making different adjustments in is going to be HSL, because everyone's going to have a different color palette that you need to work with. So here was the before and after for this particular one. And after. Just trying to bluey up that water and make it look all pretty and not so swamp-like as usual. Go to calibration. Once again, only a few small adjustments here. Just getting that water to look a little bit more pleasant again. And yet another example though of look at all that image noise that we have dragged out of it. This one is more severe because this one was at ISO 400. And this one would definitely, without question, I wouldn't even bother trying to clean up this noise in Lightroom normally. I'd just put it straight into Topaz. For this example, obviously I have hit it with the noise reduction in Lightroom. That's where I was at with this one. I've gone a bit harder with the sharpening and a bit harder with the luminance values because there was more noise there. It does an extremely impressive job of cleaning up that noise, but there is still a lot of grain there and we are losing a little bit of detail in the shark because we've had to push it so hard. So if we go to our spot remover panel, you can see there's a lot of little bits and pieces in the water in this one. If I turn it on, look at all the spots. Like there was a lot of shit I had to remove from the water in this one. So you get your before and after. Once again, I'm just getting rid of all the annoying distractions. We go into our masking panel. If I turn all the masks back on, and once again, we're just giving the illusion of light through the image just to add depth to it. Turn all these off, go through them one by one. This one, the subject select, has actually done a very good job of masking just the shark, which I would expect it to when you've got such a well-defined subject to start with. So before and after, he's just been very, very light before, not a lot of contrast in him compared to the background, wasn't standing out. I've dragged some saturation out of it to get rid of the color cast on him, tweak the highlights and the shadows and the contrast, and I've just played around with that just to add some more contrast into that shark to make him stand out. Next one, I've just done linear gradient from the top just to create a light leak. I've done it with the linear this time instead of a radial. See, raise the blacks, negative dehaze, bump the exposure a tiny bit. Done the opposite from the bottom, drag exposure down, texture and clarity, drag some of them out of it. I have also added a radial gradient into this one as well, just to create that stronger section of light coming through the frame. I'm not a fan of the light coming sort of straight down from the top. I much prefer it coming from an angle through the image. Just a personal preference thing. Even though this one, I mean, if we zoom in, you can tell by the shadow of his dorsal, the light on this day was actually coming more from over here. So I'm kind of breaking the rule I was pointing out before, but I am and I'm not. It's not like I'm trying to drag this over here and like make it look like the light was coming from the front of the shark when it was coming from the side. You can break these things a little bit. This one's more just my own personal style, personal preference thing in that I like the brightest source of light to be coming from one of the top corners of the image. So that's why I've shoved that one there. And then last but not least, just a little radial filter underneath him, just to put a shadow there. Once again, trying to sell that illusion of depth to the image. And that's it. That's all we've done with this one as well. Exact same process, exact same set of concepts, just a different image. And that's the result that we end up with. So that's it for today, guys. If you enjoyed this video, go down, smash that like button, feed the algorithm, it's much appreciated. And consider subscribing to the channel if you haven't done so already. I hope you've gotten something from this, little bit of a looky look into how I approach editing these kinds of images in Lightroom. And whilst all the images I've used today have been images of sharks, it's the exact same process I use for any marine animal images that I take with the drone. I do find these to be a really, really enjoyable type of edit to create. And by applying just a few simple concepts, you can quite quickly create some very dramatic and impactful and spectacular images out of these kinds of photos. So get stuck into Lightroom, guys. See what you can come up with for your own images, and I'll see you next Tuesday. We'll see you next Tuesday. Shazza and I will see you next Tuesday. Won't we, Shazza? See you next Tuesday.